I began my essay only thinking about the dangers of children's malleable minds. But during the writing process, my focus shifted toward the different influences weighing on these children, and I began to involve the necessity for independence in the development of a true identity. Throughout our study of Flannery, I found a similarity between a few of the children and the stories that she wrote. They each had an instinctual sense to dignify those around them. I called this faculty innocent virtue because it is inherent to children's minds, but it can be corrupted by outside influences. Certain influences endanger this innocent virtue because the malleability of children's minds leads them to willingly submit themselves to another. This vulnerability allows for the racism and hate pervading societal norms in the South to shape these children's outlook of the world. I then connected the necessity for independence in order to allow children to develop their own identity and to encourage this innocent virtue. To summarize my argument, I'll just read my thesis. The malleable minds of children lead them to be especially susceptible to influence, but their innocent virtue gives them an inherent sense of the dignity instilled in every individual. This natural perception, though, can be corrupted by those who wish to assert their own individuality over a child's. I began my essay focusing on the foundation of individuality, a name. I juxtaposed the child from Temple of the Holy Ghost and Lucy Nell from The Life You Save May Be Your Own. These two characters show a contrast between the complete freedom to develop an identity and no freedom to even have an identity. The child's namelessness and independence from influences gives her the ability to decide her own way to view others and herself. On the other hand, because Lucy Nell Sr. names her daughter after herself, she takes away her daughter's ability to form her own self, forcing her to participate in her mother's identity. I also focus on Nelson from The Artificial Negro. Nelson's inclination to adopt all of Mr. Head's principles causes him to hate and fear the world around him. Nelson begins forming his identity around his grandfather's prejudices, which suppresses his natural inclination to equalize and dignify those around him. Mr. Head's narcissism leads him to mold Nelson's identity and ideals to his own so that he can justify his hateful mindset. Nelson's idealism of his grandfather causes him to not see the world in any other way. Nelson's willingness to submit his identity to his grandfather shows the dangers of the malleability of children's minds, as Mr. Head chooses to take advantage of his naivete by not giving him the independence to decide how to view the world. However, when Nelson meets a kind, motherly black woman, he immediately feels a desire to have a relationship with her. And Nelson, for a moment, transcends the hatred and prejudice of his grandfather because his instinctual response to this colored woman dignifies rather than degrades her. In this case, the moldability of Nelson's mind allows him an opportunity to see and be in the world without hate and disdain. Children naturally do not see themselves as higher or lower than people in society. This virtuous innocence allows them to dignify everyone and to not avoid relationships with people based on their race. After their fight, Mr. Head recognizes Nelson as an individual. And my original reading said that this reconciliation comes from both of them feeling superior to an image of a black person, as we stated in class. But in my comments, Mr. Sheps told me that I should consider maybe doing the opposite view and talking about how they are actually dignifying this image and how Nelson is teaching Mr. Head a better way to view the world. Mr. Sheps also gave me the option to keep my current reading and to point out potential flaw in my argument, but I decided to go with the reading that Mr. Head's observations of Nelson's innocent virtue and acknowledgement of Nelson's individuality catalyzes his momentary change in the way he views the world. And though racism and hate characterize his childhood, Nelson independently chooses to dignify others, which teaches Mr. Head to respect others as individuals rather than an opportunity to gain power. So Nelson, in his exhibition of his innocent virtue through his interaction with the black woman, is able to show Mr. Head a flaw in the way that he's viewing the world, in the way that he is spreading this hate and prejudice, rather than this sort of dignity and this love of the world. And though this is a more positive viewing than what we did in class, I think that the positive effects of this innocent virtue in children and how their malleable minds can actually be used for good, I think that this really goes with my argument, and I think that this sort of shows like a more ideal version of Flannery's portrayal of children in her story. In conclusion, children naturally feel inclined toward a dignifying view of the world around them. However, the corrupting influences of societal norms causes the destruction of this innocent virtue and brings about generations of hate and prejudice. Children can transcend this hate and prejudice by having the independence to choose their own way to view the world. When they have this, they normally choose the path of their innocent virtue of encouraging that natural sense, and they will choose to view the world with love and to be able to see a person as an individual rather than someone to gain control over. This is shown through Nelson's example with Mr. Head and through the child's freedom to develop her own individuality, and when she has that freedom, she chooses to view everyone as equals. And Lucy Nell Sr.'s complete control over her daughter causes her to have no individuality. So independence is vital for the proper encouragement of this innocent virtue in children and allowing it to develop into a permanent, dignifying sense of the world. And with these negative influences on children, they're unable to develop that kind of perception that will carry them through their own lives. And so without this encouragement in their childhood from these influences, they are unable to continue with this sense throughout their lives. It just becomes corrupted by this hateful societal influence. That's really all I have to say about my argument, but thank you for listening.